Action.
Child Labor in Urban China by Whit, Hans, and Josh.
Josh.
Slide. So first we're going to discuss what child labor actually is. And here are the following characteristics of child labor. So it violates, the first is that it violates the nation's minimum age laws, and that varies from nation to nation. For example, in China, it is under 18 is the age of a minor. It also threatens children's physical, mental, or emotional well-being, so that involves working too much or working in dangerous conditions, and it involves intolerable abuse, like child slavery, child trafficking, debt bondage, forced labor, or illicit activities, and it prevents them from going to school and uses children to undermine labor standards. And right now, there are estimates that about 250 million children between 5 and 17 work under illegal conditions, and in China, there are about an estimated 80 million children who work under these conditions. So as you can see, that's a large chunk of the 250 million worldwide. Next slide.
Several of the causes of child labor in China are poverty, limited access to education, repression of workers' rights, and limited prohibitions on child labor. So China basically doesn't enforce the laws. The laws are there, but it still goes on. And also, families in poverty may rely on child labor as a source for attaining basic necessities for the family. So basically, they do it because they have to.
So in China, currently they define the age of a minor as under 18. However, if you're above 16 and under 18, you can still work if you are 16 and above 16 and capable, and you want to make a living on your own. And if you're between the ages of 10 and 16, you're actually allowed to work too, as long as the job is appropriate to the age range and intellect, and that's often exploited by companies because it's really ambiguous. It's a really ambiguous law. And in China, another main reason for such extensive child labor is that you only need 9 years of compulsory education, and that only goes up to the 3rd year of middle school. So after that, children often go work in factories. And also, China signed but did not ratify the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights in 1998, and that's been ratified by most countries in the world, and it basically encompasses trying to reduce the amount of child labor around the world, and it has still not taken effect in China.
60 million people in China, which is about
In China, they have what's called dispatch labor. And basically, these big agencies hire laborers in China, and they basically rent them out to big factories like Foxconn or Apple or Disney. And the Chinese government allows this, but they're only supposed to be used in times of emergency or when there's labor shortages. But basically, companies will exploit dispatch labor by hiring these workers all the time and having a good chunk of them being these workers, and they don't have to pay them insurance or make sure they're safe because they're not their own workers. They just have to pay them a base salary, which tends to be really low. And there's actually a school in China that forced all of the students there to work in a factory, or they'd be kicked out. So some of the schools even force students to work in the factories. Workers are definitely not safe. There's no safety precautions really, and there's unpaid overtime. They're basically forced to work all day, and they're forced to work 10 to 12 hours straight, usually without any bathroom breaks or anything like that.
there are several negative and positive effects of child labor. Some negative effects are that it keeps students from attending school, which in the long run causes illiteracy in adults, causing them to have a likely unsuccessful career. It also often places the children in dangerous working conditions, often causing victims to have physical, sexual, and psychological anguish.
And although it seems like child labor is a strictly negative thing, there are some positive effects. For example, when they work in factories all day, they don't have time to join gangs and start, getting involved with drugs and the drug trafficking or prostitution. And children's income might sometimes be the only source of income for a family. For example, if a dad has left the family, or a parent has died, or both the parents have died, there might be no income for the children's family, so it can be positive in that respect.
Disney was recently found out or was accused of having children working in their Cars toy line factory, and an undercover investigation discovered that there were workers as young as 14 years old, and all these factory workers were forced to work an extra 120 hours a month to meet the high demand in the Western countries. And in the factory, they had a really harsh work environment with no adequate treatment and poor ventilation for the chemical use in the toy creation, and there were several cases of suicide due to mismanagement.
Another case in China happened in the Foxconn factory, and Foxconn is basically the main company that produces all the electronic components for Apple, as well as other companies like Samsung and those kind of technological companies. And what they did was exploit the student interns, and student interns are also legal under Chinese law. And at the Foxconn factory, they were as young as 14, and basically Foxconn just said that they weren't workers. Since they aren't workers, they could be young enough as 14, and they could be children, and it would still be legal. And they also exploited dispatch labor, which we talked about before, and about 1 million of the workers in the factory. There are about 1 million of workers in the factory, and in 2010, there was 10 suicides just from people being unhappy with their life and with their job. And in the Foxconn factory, they work in assembly lines, and each person in the assembly line has to finish a task every 7 seconds, and they have to do that for 10 hours straight without any breaks. And if they mess up, they get fired. So as you can see, there's no leniency, and that takes endless determination to do that day in and day out. And the average salary of these workers is about $150 per month, which was about 2% of the money they made. So Foxconn makes really big dividends from doing that.
There's a couple things being done to stop child labor. An example is seen in boycotts of the goods that are made by children in China. People just won't buy, for example, the Cars toys after they've read about children committing suicide or having poor working conditions in the Chinese factories. And also, the International Labor Organization creates programs that aim to eliminate child labor by providing assistance and education to kids in over 88 countries.
And is China improving? In China, there has been a big movement to implement new laws and regulations to stop child labor. However, there's pretty much no authoritative institutions that will actually enforce these laws, and thus China is unlikely to stop child labor without outside intervention. Since child labor is such a key component to the Chinese economy, it's doubtful that it'll come to an end anytime soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey.